You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. It's Mike here, and I'm flying solo this week. Kate's off on family vacation. Geoff has literally gone to the birds. He'll explain that when he gets back. This week, we've got some new personalities to engage with. First of all, in the strategy suite later, we have legendary backroom boy, Bruce Young, who has been a major force in federal Liberal and provincial Liberal politics over the years. But first, in our interview segment today, we have CBC journalist Katie DeRosa. Katie has been a part of the press gallery for some years now at the Times Colonist, Vancouver Sun, and now CBC, and a whole bunch of other journalism experience before that as well. She brings her unique perspective to provincial news, and which has been over the years a bit of a boys' world in Victoria press gallery terms. But today we'll get Katie's take on what she sees the evolving face of journalism in British Columbia. So Katie, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Nice to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me. And I bring the press gallery to the hotel. I didn't want to just have my boring home, so I can show you a bit of the renovated press gallery and just kind of, give you a sense of where we all are working from while we're pre-campaign mode, I guess, when we're not on the campaign trail. This is where we're toiling away.
Well, this is a great bonus for the YouTube viewers who watch our show on YouTube, and for those on Apple and Spotify and others, this would be Theater of the Mind.
I'll describe what we're seeing.
But you're situated right now in the press gallery, and it's gone through a bit of a remodeling or renovation recently.
That's right. So there was a little bit, apparently someone found a patch of asbestos, which I'm sure in an old building is quite common.
Yeah.
So they had to redo the floors, and therefore all the furniture, all the stuff had to come out. So we used to have this old leather couch, which we don't even want to know what happened on that couch after hours. It was all ripped and torn, and there was more crumbs in there than you can imagine. So the couch is gone. We've got, more updated furniture so that we could actually have people in here without putting stuff down on top of the couch to make it pleasant. And then I'm actually doing the podcast from on top of a beer fridge, which Richard Zussman and Rob Shaw brought in here, and it does not work. So I don't know if that's some sort of symbolism of something, but we have
surprised that those two guys can't get a beer fridge to work.
I mean, they lugged it up here, so kudos to them. But there's no refrigeration. So if you want a warm beer, you can have a warm beer from there, but I don't think anyone wants that. So,
No.
And I don't think we have, because I know that we had this fake news stout that was created for us by Spinnakers 2 years ago for our press gallery Christmas party. So we do have this lovely fake news stout, which is also warm. And then another Spinnakers special off the record pale ale. So some local beers up there. And then so this is the last.
That could be an election idea, branded craft beer
yes,
for each political party.
Who's gonna jump on that?
Yeah, who wants some green beer?
So we've got like this is the old desk, and we've got the Royal BC
Got some
Museum
old typewriters there as well.
Yeah,
I see.
Baldry has a story about those typewriters, and I think he took them to Beijing or something like that. But when Baldry comes up here a lot with guests to tell them about the press gallery. So I am doing Keith Baldry's I'm taking his job right now. This is the new BC United soccer ball because of the reference to BC United sounding like a soccer team. So Kevin Falcon signed it, and nice. So we basically just have like some memorabilia on.
I see a Gourdzilla poster. Is that Gordon Campbell?
Yeah, Gordon Campbell Gourdzilla poster. And then the come visit the Royal BC Museum. The short-lived idea to $1 billion museum replacement.
Oh yes.
And then so then we've got some photos up here. And then Rob Shaw has his his photoshopped cat political photos, Politicat.
Oh yes.
And then
I'm a big fan of his Politicat endeavor there. I'm a cat guy.
Yeah. So, it's different up here. Like it's not as much. Well, we still have the phone booths. So
Not
we
as
still kind of,
disheveled as I expected.
it's not as disheveled, but I liked a bit of the disheveledness. So, I mean, Richard still has his stuffies and bobblehead, so it adds a bit of character, but
So the phone
some
booths, that's where the reporters back in the old days would actually file their stories, I guess.
yeah, well, and
Back.
we still go in there to just do stories where if you don't want someone to hear, although they're not totally soundproof, so you can't really get
Yeah,
nobody's getting any scoops in there, but
yeah.
they're functional. And then yeah, so then we're back in the kitchen now, and I'm gonna prop you up back on top of the beer fridge.
Okay, that's
So
great.
so yeah, it's the the press gallery is not as bustling as it is during session, but I think it's nice to be up here with colleagues and just banter back and forth and be able to feel like you're not missing anything. Like that's where I really love being in the press galleries, like the camaraderie and just being able to not be in your own yeah, well, I mean just the excitement of a newsroom, but with other political journalists.
So for listeners who aren't familiar with the kind of geography of the building, the press gallery is on the third floor, kind of above the speaker's side of the chamber. So you're if you are working up there and you need to run down to the house, you're just one stairwell away, I guess, and can pop through the gallery there and watch. Do you go down in person to watch question period?
I do both. So sometimes I'll stay in the press gallery and listen because I'm actually filing my story. And funnily, you can bring phones in there, but you can't bring laptops, which I kind of feel like they should just allow you to bring laptops because then I would just type away at my story while watching question period.
Yeah.
But Vaughn always goes in, so Vaughn Palmer. So I would go in with him. So if I had a feeling something was going to be really heated, I would go in to watch the drama and the back and forth exchanges. So sometimes almost relying on the video feed, I feel like is a detriment. Like I should force myself to get in there more, but that the daily deadline, you're also trying to plug away your story. And sometimes the question period is not what you're filing on. So, but then sometimes question period becomes a story. So yeah, I do like to get in there and just, obviously the rush of having a scrum right afterwards. If someone says something explosive, I think that the press gallery is the height of on your toes journalism, being able to pivot from one story to the next based on what's breaking. So I do love when session is in. Yeah, it really is. There's a buzz of excitement.
Well, you think about all the ghosts that are up in the press gallery because that press gallery would have probably been operating as a press gallery for at least 100 years, if not longer.
Well, actually, it was at one time the dining room. So they had
Oh,
the press gallery used to be in the speaker's office. So, and that is again political
interesting.
knowledge I know because of Baldry's tour. So
Yes.
we weren't always up here. This used to be a dining room, which again, it's pretty. I don't know how they made that work, but yeah.
Well, it's I can smell the fried fried food from
Well,
here.
actually, one
Uh,
thing I will show you that's quite cool is in the stairwell, they have the photos of, press galleries past, and the oldest one is 1910.
mm.
So, you've got the whole wall of all the gallery,
Oh yeah,
gallery
there they are.
members. So yeah, so it's when you come up, you do kind of feel like it's your place, place in history. So yeah,
Well, that's
it's
pretty
really
cool.
a
Thank you for the tour. You
yeah,
know,
no problem.
when I read, histories of say 100 years ago in the 1920s or thereabouts, the Vancouver Sun was a liberal paper and the Province was a conservative paper, and there were many other daily papers back then, and they all had a particular bent, and it wasn't like it was a cool, objective press gallery. It was newspapers driving agendas. Um, Today, it feels like um, I'm not singling out CBC or the Sun or anybody today, but there are other entrants to the gallery that come with a particular agenda, whether it's the Tyee or the Observer or on the other side, Post Millennial. I don't think they're at the gallery, but they pop up sometimes. What's your take on how journalism's evolving from that objectivity to more of a greater activist bent that's there on the fringes now?
Yeah, I definitely I think there's room for both, but I do think there is a need for the objective, straight news, legacy
Mhm.
media. I know that there's been a conversation about, the subsidies that are given to the newspapers and some of the larger media, and whether that's a good thing or not. There's the, still the Meta's ban on news on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, and how that's played out. But I do think there is a role for those, the media that's just going to try their best to be balanced, because otherwise people are just going to read their rebel news versus their narwhal, and never the two perspectives shall meet. So I just don't think that is a healthy society, healthy democracy. I think that it's good to be listening to all sides and hearing just different perspectives. But again, that being said, I do think those outlets can, I think they can try and provide both sides, but I think they're going to really get their people who already agree with their perspective. So I really don't want to see the hollowing out of the mainstream media, because I think that you need that objectivity and just to be able to trust, like, again, we saw in the US with Donald Trump that facts became who was telling the facts. And I feel like it's scary to me. You want to be able to know that this news outlet is going to be doing its best to tell you something that is grounded in fact and that's researched. So I kind of worry about a landscape that was only the outlets that were based on their own ideology.
Well, how long have you been in the gallery itself, or on the provincial politics beat?
Well, so I started focusing specifically on provincial politics when I joined the Vancouver Sun. So that was in 2021, actually.
Okay.
But with the Times Colonist, I was covering politics, just, more as it fit into certain issues like health and criminal justice. So I was covering politics, but I was basically the press gallery reporter when I was hired with the Sun in 2021. So, basically in the middle of the pandemic, I switched jobs and didn't move. I was in my home, working from home, from the Times Colonist to the Vancouver Sun. So it was a little bit anticlimactic to get a new job and a new title, but still be at home. But then once things sort of returned to normal, then we came back into the press gallery. And so this will be my first dedicated election campaign. Like, I've covered the election in a local capacity, again, for the Times Colonist, covering local ridings, but to cover the whole campaign, this will be my first campaign.
Now, you've been maybe your first campaign, but you've done some pretty interesting international work over the years. I believe it was a fellowship on the refugee situation in Asia, or fill me in on that.
So the Jim Travers was a foreign correspondent, and he worked a lot for most of his career for the Toronto Star, but many news outlets. And so there was after he passed away, there was a fellowship called the R. James Travers Foreign Corresponding Fellowship, and in 2012 I was the first recipient. And so that's gives, and it's for anyone listening, it's still taking applicants. So if you have a big project that you want to get some funding for, it's the bursary is $25,000 to work on that international piece. And so I had pitched a story on refugee detention, because we had two boats of asylum seekers from Sri Lanka, from the MV Sunsea and the Ocean Lady. And the MV Sunsea was the larger, 492 people, mostly Tamil refugees. And at the time, it was the Conservative government and Stephen Harper. And he was, I had heard that he was looking to Australia's strategy on dealing with refugees, which is indefinite detention, mandatory detention for any large arrivals. And so the definition of a mass arrival at the time under that sort of omnibus bill was going to be anyone, I think any people in a group of 10 or more. And there were people saying, some families could come in as, multi-generational families could arrive as asylum seekers with 10 or more people, and they would be mandatorily detained. So that was what the fellowship took me to Australia and Thailand to look at the roots of where these boats are leaving, who's organizing these boats, and as well the impact of refugee detention in Australia. And so I went to Christmas Island, which is where they have the largest detention center for refugees. And I mean, it looks like a prison. It's got, barbed wire at the top. And it was really controlled. Like, I was escorted by Australian immigration officials, but they didn't control what I could see. I could see everything. I didn't talk to any refugees in the facility, but I talked to refugees who had left Christmas Island. And they basically described the emotional torture of being in detention with no timeline of when you're going to get out. When someone serves a prison sentence for a crime, you have a sentence, okay, of 2 years or 5 years, but in this indefinite detention, that's where people are just completely demoralized. And then right after I filed that story, Australia ended up going to actually house refugees in Nauru, in Papua New Guinea, Nauru and Papua New Guinea. So that was, again, even more restrictive. And we have seen, governments like in the UK, they were trying to say, well, we're going to send people to Rwanda, or we're going to send people to Haiti. So there is on the conservative, or on the hardline anti-immigrant side, a push to just not let asylum seekers even arrive on your shores. And so that was kind of the theme of the piece. And I was quite proud of it. And now I've got 2 toddlers, so I couldn't do any of the international work such as that. But and that actually led me to do my master's in London in international migration. So I've got that in my back pocket if I ever leave journalism. So
diversified experience you've got.
Yeah.
Must bring an interesting perspective to covering BC politics. I'm again, for the sake of the listeners, I'm interested in, now you're at CBC after, your stint at the Sun covering provincial politics. What goes into deciding what stories you cover? Because I imagine you've got your own ideas, you've got CBC, you've got your boss at CBC, news director, whoever that's called. You might have people pitching you all day long, tips that come in. How does it work in the sausage factory?
Well, I mean, a lot of times it's just you got three options in front of you, and you have to decide what is the most newsworthy, what's the most story that's in the public interest. And one example of a story that raises the question of do we cover this was just recently. There was reporting about this fringe or more right-wing sect of the BC Conservatives that's got this allegedly has started a Fire John Rustad website. And, but the big question for me as a journalist is who's behind this. So, they purport to be BC Conservatives, the OG BC Conservatives who were there long before John Rustad became leader. And the allegations on the website is that he's brought in, Teresa Watt and Gavin Dew and people from, BC United camp, former BC Liberals, and they're feeling that that's diluting the conservative brand. But for me, until I can find out who's behind that website, it's that's part of the digging that has to go in. So I really need to verify that it is actually a disgruntled group of conservatives, and will they talk to me? So that's kind of the consideration that goes into it. Yeah, we don't write on rumor or speculation. We really have to have it grounded in fact. So, that's something that we're looking at, and you could plug away at it. But I feel like we have to be more cautious, especially in a political campaign where you've got maybe operatives who are not 100% genuine as to where they're coming from, and you really have to dig into that.
So you're, so obviously you're juggling a bunch of stories at any given time. Some may bear fruit, some may not. And you at CBC, you have resources you can draw on. We were talking offline the other day about the bureaus you've got at CBC. So unique to probably any news agency in British Columbia, you've got a network there you can call upon for help, I guess.
I mean, I think that is huge. I think that's going to be a real resource during the campaign. Unfortunately, I don't want to single anyone out, but I know, like, it's been in the news that Global is removing its local production of its Okanagan newscast. So it will be produced in Vancouver and a much more skeleton staff. And, I know other media outlets have done similar, hollowing out of those regional news sources. And I think that that's really concerning. Like, again, I think that's a resource for us during the election. We have Marcello Bernardo in Kamloops, and then we've got Shelley Joyce in Prince George, and really, excellent journalists who know their community. So yeah, I just think
Do you have a
during
bureau
the
in
election,
Kelowna as well?
yes, we do. That's at Brady Strachan.
Right. And
Yeah,
then you have
and Tom
Victoria.
Popick. Yeah, and Victoria, and so 8 bureaus actually in total. So
Prince Rupert's got still has
yes,
an operation there. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that is going to be a resource for us, a huge resource, because for first of all, even from a logistical point of view, instead of me or a few journalists from Vancouver and Victoria flying, to follow the leaders, let's have someone who is local to that area, who knows the issues, who's already talked to the mayor and local, individuals in the community, advocates in the community. So I think that during the campaign will be a real resource, especially since, a lot of the North and some of the Fraser Valley could be potential swing ridings for where the BC Conservatives are hoping to pick up seats. So we need to be talking to people about what they're upset about, what they're just unhappy about, or what they're happy about, what they think has worked. So with the NDP strategy. So I definitely think that that's where we need to focus, is beyond the spin, is looking at what voters are feeling right now.
So your journalism showing up on TV, of course. You're the TV CBC TV's person in Victoria, but you're also doing radio as well, right?
Yes, that's new for me, because I really think the challenge with radio is like a minute, right? So as a print reporter, where I have 600 words or even more, trying to get just the most important facts down to a minute is challenging. But then I think for me, it's nice to have the different platforms that complement each other. So I might still do a more in-depth piece for the web, and then I'll do the radio, and then a TV, which again for me is trying to tell the visual story, which as a 15-year print reporter is definitely a challenge. It's a new thing for me. So now I'm trying to think about, okay, what are the visuals? How do I match the words to the visuals? And it's definitely a new game for me.
Well, what sets CBC apart, I guess, on the digital side is there's no paywall, right?
Yes,
So
exactly. Yeah.
People can freely access that if they don't have a Bank for Center, Globe Mail, or whatever subscription. So I would, I seem to get it on my Apple phone quite a bit. These CBC stories,
and that's
kicking
good.
up.
That's good. And
So,
but that's why I mentioned the the ban on local media sharing on Facebook and Instagram, because that is a way that a lot of outlets will get their stories to either new people or new readers, or they're a lot of people are getting their news from social media, and so I really think that's a concern. I know that David Eby said he was trying to reach a deal, especially during wildfire season, so that people were not missing essential news during evacuation orders. And a lot of people are critical of the deal that they got, which was that the Facebook and Meta or Instagram would allow government alerts, but that still doesn't make any concessions for media outlets. And so and I had some
Google's done a deal now, though, right?
Yes, Google has agreed to give a large sum of money. I can't remember the amount, but so Google has made the deal, but not Meta, the parent company of Facebook. So yeah, I really still think there. And how does that play out during the campaign? Does that push people even more into the echo chambers of they're going to follow the Facebook sites that they won't like, but they might not get the more balanced, objective view from media outlets. So I think this is going to be the first campaign where there's that ban on news on Facebook.
So what do you expect in the campaign as a journalist in terms of how you're going to cover it? Because in my my experience going back to, I remember back in 1996, 2001, there's, journalists were coming on the plane, and there was a big charter bus, big charter bus. And that was just the expectation, right? The journalists would be served meals, and there'd be cold beer in the fridge to make sure they were treated like royalty. And that was, I think, largely still the reality up until about 2013. In Christie's campaign, we had a charter plane, we had a bus of sorts, and we actually had a satellite truck to make sure we could upload broadcast quality video from the field. But by 2017, it was feeling like that was overbuilt. And in fact, in 2017, Horgan just drove around Lower Mainland in a minivan.
Yeah.
And we were thinking like these guys have no money. What are they doing? And it's like, well, actually they were just being smart.
Yeah. I was gonna say smarter with the money. Yeah.
And now it's like everyone's got a pretty good quality iPhone that can, like citizen journalists or whatever, people that are just uploading social media, they really don't need all the foo for us. So what do you think? What's your plan for 2024
Well,
in terms of how you're going to get around?
I know, the NDP is going to have a bus, and so I'm sure there'll be people on that bus. But then we still don't know if exactly how the Conservatives are going to be getting around. If they're going to have, even like for example, the Greens had a release saying Adam Olsen is just kind of doing his little a mini tour, I guess, of his own. Obviously, it's early days, but as a pre-campaign sort of tour. And so I think it's going to be challenging to give, coverage to all four parties. And I think that that's where, again, you need those resources on the ground, like someone's, perhaps embedded with each campaign for each day. And then you're all kind of sharing your information, finding the themes and trying to kind of make every day a cohesive package, because you want to say what all four leaders have said that day. But if one's talking about mental health and the other one's talking about crime and the other one's talking about housing, then how do you package that into one story? So I definitely think, and again, it's important to be with the leaders, because you can see times where they might be interacting with the public and it might not go well, or what are they hearing from people on the ground? So I think whatever it looks like for, once we find out the bus or how the tour will look like, it's just really being with them. And again, for example, BC United keeps saying, don't look at the polls, look at how we're interacting, look at the people coming to our events, look at the reception we're getting. And of course they had their big promise with the promise to cut the provincial income tax on the first $50,000. So is that hitting? So I think that right now we're largely relying on the polls because we're not on the campaign trail. So I think perhaps during the campaign, we will get that look of beyond the polls, what's the mood? Again, the BC United often say, well, nobody knows who John Rustad is. They just know, they see the word conservative, they associate him with Pierre Poilievre, and he's floating on that. Is that true? When he goes to events, do they connect with John Rustad as a leader? So I think that's going to be really
When did you
interesting to
really
watch.
see the Conservatives emerging as the main contender? What was was there a moment where you thought, geez, these guys really have eclipsed the BC United?
I mean, definitely there was, the attention was on the Conservatives. Even during question period, everyone was wondering what's their first question going to be. And I mean, the NDP made hay of their first question being related to SOGI and, sexual orientation and gender identity for those who don't know. But, and they were trying to use that to say, okay, look, this is a fringe party. But the more the more they would ask questions in question period. There was questions about forestry, which John Rustad has a strong background in, and a lot of the resource issues, and so again, I wouldn't say even then I thought, oh, light bulb moment, but it was like, I would say it was a slow build. It was getting out of that single issue of SOGI and vaccine mandates. But again, they did, claim victory when last month when the province lifted the vaccine mandates. They were trying to say, see, this was us pushing all along, and now the government is we forced the government's hand. So at the time when they had the rally with, dozens of health workers who were sidelined, there was still a perception of, well, this is still a fringe group. But then I think it became more, as the healthcare shortages were playing out, people were saying, I mean, even though it's not a huge amount, maybe 2,000 people were 2,500 health workers were sidelined. People were saying, we just can't afford to have anyone sidelined because of vaccine mandates. And I mean, a lot of us who got vaccines are probably not keeping up with their COVID vaccine anyway. So it did become a bit well, why is BC the only jurisdiction that still has these vaccine mandates? So it was almost like that
Mhm.
issue that kind of maybe started on the fringe became a little bit more
Mhm.
widespread, that people thought, like, we were sending cancer patients to Bellingham. We are sending cancer patients to Bellingham. We don't know if any of those doctors and nurses are vaccinated. There's no
Mhm.
vaccine mandate in the States, but we feel safe enough to send people for radiation because they're going to get faster
Mhm.
radiation treatment in Bellingham than they will here.
Mhm.
So that kind of, when that point, I think, was raised, that I think that really hit people, like that we're going to send people. Yeah. So I think that there's one issue of the vaccine mandate that became more mainstream as the pandemic
Well, there's no
was in the
shortage of issues
shadow.
out there either. I mean, for a government that's, the premier's done pretty well in terms of his personal favorability numbers. And, for the most part, government's been leading the polls. Yet, this week I noticed one of your stories was about this firefighter in Victoria who wrote a letter to the premier and got disciplined, 1 day suspension, I think, from the fire department. And
Yeah.
to me, it just struck me as an issue that's it's kind of an uncontrollable thing, where it's just something kind of comes out of nowhere. And it's an interesting story because it's tapping into people's experience in Victoria dealing with encampments and the addiction issues and safety. And that the mayor's response was, I think, maybe a little tone deaf in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
reading the room of what people were feeling. But to me, that's kind of bubbling up from the Conservatives are obviously going to benefit from that, but that's bubbling up from the bottom, and the NDP are playing whack-a-mole on a number of these issues.
Yes, I think that that's a good example of almost a microcosm, a small issue that one firefighter spoke out. I mean, obviously, he's not the only person who's upset about this proposed, homeless services facility on Dowler Place in Victoria. But this one letter, and then this perhaps likely it seems to be an overreaction by the fire chief by suspending him, and then suddenly the premier's involved. The candidate for BC Conservative candidate Tim Thielman is involved, kind of championing, saying
Yeah.
that he's the champion of this firefighter, and that people have legitimate safety concerns. And then again, the mayor trying to say, well, the premier shouldn't be weighing in. Well, I mean, it's an election, and this is public
Yeah.
safety and public drug use, and that's a huge issue in every community. So I definitely think you're right. It kind of, it's not surprising that it bubbled up, and I think we're going to see that in ridings across BC, like in the Surrey ridings. We're going to see still the debate over the RCMP and public safety, and whether the NDP made the right choice in forcing the RCMP on Surrey, whether the costs are going to balloon, and who wears that, who takes responsibility for that. So I think in a lot of communities, the public safety issue, decriminalization is still a shadow that's hanging over the NDP because of sort of their backtracking of it. And I definitely think that we will see that play out at the local level in different ridings.
Well, lots of issues to cover, and I get the impression you'll be like a Swiss Army knife for CBC going out there and doing that. Katie, I just want to thank you for stopping by today and first of all, giving us a personal tour of the press gallery. It was fantastic, but also to learn a bit more about your background and how you're going to approach this election. And we hope to get a chance to talk to you again at Hotel Pacifico.
Thanks, Mike. I enjoyed that, and I would love to come back on. So maybe the beer fridge will be fixed by then. So we'll or
Probably
maybe
not
you
if it's
come.
up to Rob and Richard, but
That's
maybe someone
true.
more handy like yourself can help them out.
Guests, you might remember a few months ago we spoke about the work the Nisga'a Nation is doing to build out the first Indigenous-owned and operated telecommunications network in Canada. It's a one-of-a-kind partnership in which Telus will construct the cellular towers and own the network, and the nation will own and maintain the infrastructure once the towers are on air. And I'm glad to share an update that the new tower has been completed in Ayanch, meaning all 4 Nisga'a Nation villages in the Nass Valley are now part of Telus's wireless network. It's an important milestone, with more to come. Because Nisga'a lands are home to Lissam's Internet and Technology Services, or LITS, one of the first Indigenous-owned and operated telecommunications networks in Canada. And Telus is also committed to providing network technology training to LIT's employees so that they can maintain the infrastructure and increase the capacity of their growing company, leading to more economic development opportunities for LIT's and Nisga'a residents. By the end of 2024, 3 more towers will be completed along Highway 113, bringing improved safety and peace of mind to those traveling between these close-knit communities. But don't take it from me. Take it from Andrew Bourne, IT Director of Nisga'a Nation, who spoke to community members and reporters upon the completion of the 3rd tower. Quote, "Heartfelt thanks to you all. It really touches home, knowing people can now have the security in knowing whatever phone they may have, they can be in communication with their families and friends. The LITS team is excited to continue their learning path, and the remainder of the project is really ramping excitement in the communities. You can tell." On behalf of Telus, I want to thank everyone involved in this work to improve rural and Indigenous connectivity, including the Government of Canada and the Nisga'a Nation. Stay tuned, guests, as there's more to come as presenting sponsor Telus continues to demonstrate what it means to be BC's hometown team.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Here in the Strategy Suite, tidying up to welcome our Strategy Suite guest today. But first, a shout out to committed listener Big Daddy Drew Drastic, who accosted me in the Queen of Oak Bay gift shop on the weekend. We have quite a range of Hotel Pacifico fans out there, so it was good to see Drew Drastic in person, whereupon he listed off the highlights of recent shows to the extent I thought he might be stalking me. I once promoted Drew Drastic in an all-star wrestling event in Ladysmith. True story. And he was a second-round pick of the Ottawa Rough Riders, and he wore number 69, patrolling the offensive line for Western Michigan back in the day. Our fans come in all shapes and sizes. And today in the Strategy Suite, here's another offensive lineman from the UBC Thunderbirds, Bruce Young, also known as a longtime Liberal backroomer who blocked his way into the Prime Minister's office under Paul Martin. He quarterbacked Justin Trudeau's leadership campaign in British Columbia. He game planned the historic federal Liberal breakthrough in BC in 2015 as campaign chair. Today, Bruce tells me he is mostly retired from politics, but has certainly not stopped observing it. Bruce, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
What was your number at UBC anyways?
52, which also was the grade I received in the mandatory French course after taking it for the 3rd time.
Is that why you didn't stick in Ottawa?
Actually, I learned
52% of French.
Working in the nation's capital was a beautiful experience when I was in my 20s, and I actually became somewhat functionable in French. But of course, when I came back home to British Columbia, I didn't get to practice as much as I would like. And of course, I married a West Island Anglo,
Yes.
and that didn't help my French either.
Yes, she's a fine lady. And now I'd like to thank you as well for taking a break from your drive-through job at Wendy's, for stopping at Hotel Pacifico today. For those watching on YouTube again, I'll have a
Like Kamala
cheeseburger
Harris,
and fries and Diet Coke, please.
Yeah, exactly. Like Kamala Harris, I actually worked at McDonald's when I was a kid, so it was a great experience.
Well, let's take a tour through BC politics with you, Bruce. First of all, each week we just kind of catch everybody up with the latest and greatest of what's happening in the pre-election period. Last week, we talked about the rumor that Gavin Dew may become a Conservative candidate in Kelowna, and lo and behold, it happened. And Gavin Dew was anointed in Kelowna Mission, while the candidate for the Conservatives, Alexandra Wright, was shown to the exit. And she's fired back, alleging that she was offered a financial incentive, or at least campaign funds. I wouldn't call it personal financial incentive, but that she'd be set up in the next door riding. It's kind of just an example of, they left the door to the sausage factory open. We all got to peek inside. You've been there in these things, Bruce, where sorting out these candidate nominations can get a little messy.
The worst part of running any campaign is the whole candidate nomination process. It is sausage making in the extreme. There's no doubt about it. It seems to me the Conservatives in general have been trying to upgrade some of the candidates that they had from very early on, before they got a lot of helium in their numbers, in their province-wide numbers. And so I think as well, they recognize that some of the things the candidate had suggested, including those that have been highlighted by BC United about wanting to criminally charge in some form Bonnie Henry, maybe were off-brand, off-message, or maybe just not really helpful to the election that was coming up. So it's not at all unusual that this sort of thing happens. It's rare that we get a look on the inside. And so they've chosen Gavin Dew, who is about as normal as an individual as any Conservative candidate in this province.
Well, he's certainly well known in political backrooms and front rooms. He ran for leader for BC United, or
Yep.
BC Liberal as it was back then. He's run for office. So,
and he's got a very accomplished spouse, and they're entrepreneurs and stuff. So it's a good get for the BC Conservatives.
Yeah, and he'll just have to go through the the brain damage of the other candidate not being happy, and there's always a bit of noise around these things. And
will the other candidate be so unhappy that she decides to run as an independent and further muddy the waters in that constituency?
And I saw Renee Merrifield blast away on that issue as well. She's the outgoing BC United MLA and also known as a federal Conservative. So I note that she's sticking with the team and sending out messages in support of BC United, even though, some might say she might have fit quite well with the BC Conservatives, but there still is, vestiges of loyalty there within the caucus to the group there. So Renee was exhibiting that this week. Our interview with Katie DeRosa earlier, she had noted the Fire Rustad website that had been launched by some kind of shadowy group. I don't know enough about these IT things to go into the source code and find the tricks. We did do that once. Someone on the Christy Clark leadership campaign did find out who launched a anti-Christy Clark website concerning a cat back in the leadership campaign. So you best not leave your cookie crumbs if you are doing that kind of stuff. But it seems to be like the Conservatives have a group that liked it the way it was, OG, original gangster conservatism, no compromises, we can win without all those other people type of approach. And it's those people ultimately will hold you back from winning if you listen to them, or listen to them explicitly, I guess.
Listen, it's good old-fashioned skullduggery. This sort of stuff has happened for decades. It may not have been web pages or through social media in the past, but this sort of stuff has always been a part of politics, and so no one should be surprised by it. If it is legit, then your thesis holds that there is a group within the Conservative Party who aren't at all happy with the move towards what is an attempt for a bigger tent by Rustad. And there's no reason we should believe that it is legit at this point. As Katie pointed out, until they find out who it is and they're willing to talk to her, it's going to be difficult to know whether it's someone with ulterior motives, which is entirely possible given the long and colorful history of politics in this province. But I don't read too much into it, except to say that obviously any criticism in any form that's landed at Rustad now is merely a function of how well that party is doing in the polls.
Well, on the one hand, I mean, may benefit from looking like he's having a fight with the far right fringe in his party and may position him better for the mainstream voter. On the other hand, he ran off and did a Jordan Peterson interview in the past week. And, there's kind of two takes on that. I mean, Jordan Peterson's got pretty big reach. And Abacus actually put out a poll this week on who likes Jordan Peterson. And young men in particular, and certainly federal Conservatives. But it's not, I mean, the ones who don't like him are people who vote NDP. But, maybe that's getting Rustad on the radar screen with people who might vote for him and just don't know who he is. On the other hand, it's kind of a signal to people in the middle of the spectrum, like, I don't know about this. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't help you attract centrist voters. That would be my observation. That's the first thing, but it may provide some enthusiasm to the
Fires up the
traditional.
base.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so much of what has been counterintuitive to politics in this province in the last, I'll say, year and a half, is the degree to which the Conservatives and even BC United are trying to fire up that sort of center right. I would even say more right base of voters in this province, and churn turnout and all that sort of stuff. Because turnout's going to matter. It always does. And we know, you and I both, we've got the gray in our beards to show for it, how well the NDP does when they pulled their vote. They are as good as any political machine in this country, the BC NDP. And so my theory is that the Conservatives and BC United will not have the same sort of machinery. And they got to do something to get people to go to the polls and cast a ballot for them.
What do you make of the NDP putting election day on a Saturday? Is that a turnout advantage for them? Because in the past, on a weekday, a lot of the unionized workers just get the day off and go pull it. I thought that was comparative advantage on a weekday, but maybe Saturday is even better for them. I don't know.
I don't know, Mike. It could be. It's hard to say how that'll play out. You know, like you point out, New Democrats are going to take the day off and pull vote and do all the sort of election machinery that they do. And so will enthusiastic volunteers from other political parties. Whether it's on a Saturday or a Monday, I'm not sure that makes much of a difference.
Fair enough. So there was a poll that came out this week from Abacus, similar to Leger last week. Leger was about a 3-point gap. Abacus is 5. Some of the highlights, it was 42-37 for the NDP. Some of the interesting aspects of it, among those who say they're definitely voting, it was actually a 7-point gap for the NDP. And that's reflected by the age break, because 60 plus population is a 20-point NDP lead, according to Abacus. 8-point lead among 45 to 59s. But once you get below 45, the Conservatives lead, which defies nature based on everything I ever saw in politics prior to about 3 years ago. Conservatives are supposed to be grumpy old people, but now they're grumpy young people.
And now the grumpy old people are progressive.
But the other things which you know, if I were an NDPer, I'd be a little concerned about is right track is 29, wrong track 51, and you know, on the regional breaks, they're as one would think, the Conservatives are stronger in the interior. NDP up 9 in Metro Van and up 9 in the out. So, anyways, who knows? Just a poll, it's a snapshot. But you know, 20 points ahead for 60 plus. Like, I gotta think, if the Conservatives can narrow the gap with older people, they're both making headway on a turnout advantage, but also just getting the votes they need. And historically, economic issues, issues like crime would be issues that would move older voters. And so far, they're not. What's your take on that? Because you're almost officially an older voter.
I'm 56. Thank you very much. I was a summer of love child. I think a couple of things. Top line. One, the current political environment, both in this province, in other provinces, and nationwide, is a real bitch for incumbents. That's the first thing. There's been a clear and obvious blowback with international factors at play from the pandemic, and it makes it very difficult for incumbents. It's even making it difficult for the Saskatchewan party in Saskatchewan, although I expect them to win because they're going to run up big margins in those rural seats. But of all the parties that are incumbents that are running for re-election, the NDP appears to be faring as well as any of them at this point in this province. The other observation I would have is that the province-wide numbers are by and large, appear to be fairly stable over the last sort of several months. And you and I both are old enough to remember and have lived through 1996, where the NDP lost the popular vote but won the election by virtue of the vagaries of vote efficiency and where the votes came in various constituencies. And then the third thing I think I would highlight for your viewers is that province-wide horse race numbers are not a particularly useful tool for the individual campaigns, except possibly for morale. Makes people feel good, puts a jump in the step of the guys and gals that are knocking doors, all that sort of stuff. But, you know, there's political parties that will purposely not poll in certain geographies because they realize they have no chance of winning. And they will instead focus their time on what do we need to move 500 or 1,000 people in individual constituencies where we are in play. And so I always sort of, when there's publicly released polls, I always remind people that they get what they paid for them. I do think I would be concerned about voter turnout of the younger demographic, just from what I've seen in previous campaigns. It's hard to capture that group and get them enthusiastic about going to the polls. Although maybe the Rustad Peterson interview indicates that they are aware of that over on that side of the equation. Old people will go out and vote. Middle-aged people will absolutely go out and vote. And I think there's a fair amount of anxiety with that demographic, certainly in the Lower Mainland, about affordability, about the environment and climate change and the impact that it's having in various places in our province. And those sorts of issues will be top of mind for a lot of those older voters. And the New Democrats currently are fairly well positioned in those areas.
Well, one aspect I want to drill down with you on is the shakeup on the provincial political spectrum. And from basically 1991 until last election, I would call it the BC Liberal era on the free enterprise side, with the BC Liberals as the dominant, becoming the dominant party during that time. That's come to an end. Well, first of all, they changed the name of the party, but we're in a new era polls tell us, about to unfold, with the Conservatives coming to the forefront. And that is shaking up how some voters will decide how they vote, and particularly federal liberal centrist type voters who might have felt comfortable with the BC Liberals over the years. Not all, because I mean, certainly a lot of federal Liberals voted NDP particularly the last two elections, but
particularly south of the Fraser.
Yeah. So right now you've got the polls tell us there's a majority of Liberal voters choosing the NDP. You're a federal Liberal voter. You know, voting Conservative might be a hard pill for you to swallow, or even want to consider. I mean, you'd have a BC United, presumably have a BC United option. You've got an NDP option. How do you think people in your shoes are feeling right now about that choice, that they're maybe don't have a perfect home?
Yeah, I mean, it's uninspiring, quite frankly. When you're watching what's happening in America right now and the positive turn that's happened for Harris Walz, that sort of dynamic is very exciting to your centrist, sort of traditional federal Liberal voter. There's no equivalent right now in this province. There's a lot of people that are confused about what to do. There's a lot of people muttering darkly about becoming 32nd New Democrats, depending on the constituency. If they feel that they can stop the Conservative candidate, they're going to go in and do something that would have been unthinkable in previous elections, which is cast a support for the provincial New Democrats. I spoke to a lot of friends over the last number of months, and there is that confusion, but there also is no firm direction of where people are going. A lot of federal Liberal voters that have traditionally been involved in the BC Liberals are still hanging in there, with dark jokes about, well, we're still Liberals in parentheses when we get to the ballot box. Like the musician
referring to the the ballot's going to say formerly BC Liberal Party.
Exactly, which is as close as you're going to get to being able to vote for a Liberal on during the campaign. So it's really a tough time in terms of what to do and how to go about it. There are some people that will will stick with the predominant free enterprise coalition party, which right now appears to be the Conservatives. But what we've learned from what happened, or what we've been reminded of from what happened in America recently, is just how quickly things can change. And Kevin Falcon is a capable campaigner. And if he gets a chance to perform well in a debate, I think it's going to provide some helium to his numbers, possibly. You can't count on it. But there is a chance, that he will do well in a debate. Rustad, I think, is untested in that area, but there's no reason to think he won't perform well. And Ebby is very capable as a debater, although they're all middle-aged white dudes, if I can be kind. And
Except for Sonia.
Except for Sonia Furstenau, who has a real opportunity to be something entirely different than the clear status quo that exists there.
Except that she doesn't have any candidates on the ballot at this point.
No, she's got
25.
19 was what my number was from a couple of days ago. But if you're the Greens, you're not. Honestly, I'm not providing any advice to anybody, but if I was advising the Greens, I'd be like, there's 3 or 4 constituencies. We need to dump every resource into those and paper the rest of the ridings with smiling faces who will never see a doorstep.
Well, BC United, though, they're obviously been in an extremely tough spot this year, particularly, and they send mixed messages.
For sure.
On the one hand, it's like they're blasting away at the Conservatives for being too out there and extreme. On the other hand, they're coming in with a $5.4 billion income tax cut with no plan to pay for it, really, despite some assurances that it will pay for itself. And so for those voters in the middle of the spectrum, it's like, who are these guys?
Well, you raise an important point, and people like to talk. The pundits, people like you and me, talk about the realignment of the Free Enterprise Coalition. What people aren't talking about is the opportunity that exists for the current provincial NDP to realign their own voter coalition, to double down on that Horgan coalition and become a party not only of the left but of the center left, a party that can see some resource development, but also care about the environment. A party that can maybe start to display some fiscal prudence, but at the same time is going to make sure that the people in our society who are the most vulnerable are protected. And so there is an opportunity for the NDP to realign provincial politics as there is for the traditional Free Enterprise Coalition, from my perspective. Whether or not they'll take that opportunity or not is yet unseen, or unknown, but the opportunity is certainly there for them.
Well, I think there is been a gradual realignment over the last few elections where the NDP have really cleaned up on the more urbanized vote, whereas you go back to Gordon Campbell and the BC Liberals will win more than half the seats in the city of Vancouver. And now it's quite possible the NDP could win almost all of them, maybe not Quilchena, probably still not, but they could win every other seat in Vancouver.
Yeah, they're going to, I'm in the Premier's riding. He's going to win overwhelmingly, and a lot of the neighboring ridings, with the exception of Quilchena, will likely go New Democrat.
But on the other hand, I think the Conservative play is going after those more lunch bucket or NDP votes that are outside the urban centers, like north of Victoria, on Vancouver Island, and for sure in the suburbs, and where, let's call them the flyover regional districts as opposed to the flyover states. But, there's the Conservatives may say, okay, fine, you take those federal Liberals in the city. We're going after a different group of voters, much like Poilievre has done, much like Trump has done, much like Boris Johnson did in the UK. And we're going after people that are the non-elites, and that's maybe their play. that
Yeah.
gets around that, and both coalitions realign. Maybe.
Yeah, this elite non-elite thing is always an interesting debate because all parties have elites, so on quote unquote elites in them. The conservative candidate in Quilchena was educated at Princeton and the Sorbonne, not like dummies like me that did a poli-sci degree up at UBC.
Yeah.
There's elites everywhere. There's elites under every cushion. The question you're asking, though, is there enough seats for the Conservatives to patch together enough seats to form a government with that approach? And the answer is maybe, but they're going to have to perform well, not only in the Western Fraser Valley, but into the Surreys and the Tri-Cities and maybe even the North Shore. And if they can break through in those places, maybe they have a chance. But the other thing to watch, and we won't know until the election is over, is how many constituencies, were 500 seat jobs, either for the NDP or the Conservatives. What happened in 2017, there was a number of close ridings that even though, Premier Clark won the election, she didn't have enough for a majority government. And there was a couple of constituencies that were just so close, but in the end, the NDP won them, and that allowed them to form a government. So,
Comox famously, and East Maple Ridge.
Yeah.
And that's, the Conservatives need a bit of a perfect storm to win.
Mm-hmm.
But as you mentioned earlier, Falcon gets on the debate. He performs well. He's a barrier to them winning. And so the Greens are a little unpredictable, but if they're only running less than 40 candidates and they're not on a lot of seats, where, like, say, Richmond, and not splitting center left vote in Richmond, that probably helps the NDP. Although people will say second choice Conservatives are a strong second choice for Greens too. So that's why we play the games.
Yeah, no, listen, and there's no universe where the Greens exclusively pull from left of center voting populations anyway. They're all over the map. There's people who tend to be more conservative that vote Green, and I'm constantly reminded of that, by the way, by my NDP friends, that the Green Party are not a progressive party. So I'm not sure I believe it, but that's what I'm told by people much wiser than me. It is going to be interesting. It'll be especially interesting to see what happens after the election, because as happens after every election, there will be a significant body of this electorate and certainly of political activists who will be dissatisfied with the results.
So presumably after the election and the dust settles, there might be a lot of Liberals who say, we want the BC Liberal Party back. And that's a potential outcome, is that, a new party executive decides to put it back to the members and say, we're better off going back to what we had. And the BC Liberal Party lives on. Do you think that's possible?
It's possible. I think there will also be, if indeed there is a whiff of that actually happening, I think there will be a counter pressure from some of the more conservative elements in that party, or possible people from the BC Conservative Party, to prevent it. So there will be tension. I'm long retired from active politics. If I was 20 years old, I would take over the executive of BC United, assuming a loss in the next election. I would make sure we had an executive of people that were liberal in name and in policy orientation. And I would run someone from Leader who was capable of winning 12 to 15 seats in this province, and rebuilding the Ray Perot coalition. But the conservative element will try and prevent that from happening, because it'll mean they never get to form a government, or at least they would have to so aggressively moderate themselves.
Depends what the nature of it is, I would argue, because from, say, 1952 to 1972, the Liberals consistently got about 20% of the vote.
Yep.
and consistently got about 6 to 7 seats.
Yep.
And it was the Socreds who were in government the whole time.
Yep.
And so, I mean, it is possible there could be a liberal, if it mirrored the federal liberal voting patterns, it would actually overlay with the provincial NDP seats more than potential conservative seats. It depends.
Sure.
It depends what they're talking about. It depends what the policy is. Depends what the nature of the beast is. But it's a wild card for sure. I mean, we'll see what the results are on the 19th of October as to how everyone reacts from there and who's in government and how the campaign went and what the policy orientations are going to be. Just to tie in the provincial scene with the federal scene for a second, it doesn't seem like the Poilievre campaign would have drawn it up this way. Obviously, they weren't expecting the provincial Conservatives to rise like a phoenix out of the ashes over the last year and a half. But there's obviously a lot of excited Conservative people about this. Now, the election or non-election of Rustad in October seems like it could make an impact on Poilievre. Like, if they actually won, it would be like, wow, this is a big deal. But then these guys get in government a year before the federal election, and it's like, okay, if they turn out to be a disaster, then look out, Canada. Or on the flip side, it's like, this is just another proof point of the inevitable outcome in the federal election. Like, do you think BC might influence federal dynamics?
It's quite possible. It's a risk. The first thing that happens when you win an election and you form government is you realize all the rhubarb that you're now in from stuff that you didn't know before you seized power. And a lot of the things you promised and talked about during the campaign become irrelevant to the emerging things that come from your steadfast, nonpartisan, impartial, and dispassionate full-time public servants who have a much better read on what's actually happening than you do. And you're right to consider and take their advice in that set of circumstances. But boy, oh boy, it's deep water. And you're right, it could have an impact on federal politics. On the other side, if the Conservative Party, as the polls look like nationally, are in line to win an election next year, and Rustad doesn't make it this time, what does 3 years of a national Conservative government do to the popularity of the Provincial Conservative Party at the next election? Is this the singular window for the BC Conservatives to get a shot at it before they have to start carrying water for their federal cousins, and what may or may not be very rare for a government to get 3 years of a honeymoon?
I think this is a go for broke moment for them. I think
for sure.
I think they got to win it. Because it doesn't get any better than this for the BC Conservatives.
Yeah, and they've pulled in lots of strategists and campaign workers from across the country, Quebec and other places, and they're doing that because they didn't have the infrastructure to actually run a proper campaign. It's pretty clear that they're tooling up and getting into that position, and it'll be really fascinating to watch. And thank God I have nothing to do with active involvement in it.
On that note, let's go get a drink in the minibar.
Or the local Irish pub.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Do you want to raise a glass or take a shot at anyone this week?
No, I don't have. I'm mad at the Chicago Cubs for having such a crappy season and dropping 3 in Cleveland. They lost. They won 2 of 3 off the Blue Jays. We spent a lot of time cheering for the Cubs in this household, and they're having a tough season. So the mood is not as uplifting as it might otherwise be.
Well, I know you watch a lot of baseball, so it's apropos that you would work that into the minibar. I'm going to raise a glass, and you may join me on this, to Chuck Strahl, who passed away recently. Chuck was a true gentleman in Canadian politics, and I got to know him briefly through his support for the BC Liberals back in the day, and also as a minister dealing with the BC Liberal government, and a true gentleman whose word was as good as any word could be. He had a long battle with a form of cancer, I believe it was, and far exceeded expectations on how long he could maintain a healthy life after his initial diagnosis many years ago. There's many tributes that are flowing over the internet. One in particular I saw from Colin Metcalf was indicative of, I think, a lot of the emotion that people who worked with him as staffers or as fellow supporters felt for him. But I think across the spectrum, there's a lot of respect for him. So condolences to his family and his son, Mark, who is a member of parliament in his footsteps in Chilliwack.
We could sure use a lot more of his basic decency in the world of politics today. He was a good man, and may he rest in peace.
Absolutely. So I'd like to thank our guest today, Katie DeRosa from CBC, for joining us. Thank Bruce Young for coming into the strategy suite as a pinch hitter, as Kate and Geoff flew the coop. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, for their ongoing support of Hotel Pacifico. See you next week. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.